Sure. Yeah, I think I've got a good start.
All right.
Well, Muggs, one of your favorite oft-quoted quotes is that people would rather believe than understand. And, in my time getting to know Adam was something that I realized I didn't really have in my head, because you began as a evolutionary biology student, correct?
Yeah.
In school?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So thinking about evolution responsibly or correctly, or right thinking, I guess is what I'm thinking. As far as if it's better to understand, what are the tools we need to understand properly, right thinking, and which of those tools do you think come from sort of an evolutionary understanding or paradigm?
Well, I think you have to recognize as humans we're evolved creatures. One, that means that there might be some inherent biases that we have to look out for our own survival. It's difficult to get beyond the bias, but that's what science is about. And so to me, it's trying to ask where and when am I biased, and trying to look at things as honestly as where the data lead. And so I think the problem is that as evolutionary products, that kind of truth wasn't important. You had to be able to manipulate things, but to understand that the universe is 4.5 billion years, that doesn't make any difference in day-to-day life.
Sure.
Or that you're related to everything on the planet, everything. If people do this genealogy and they say, oh, gee, we're connected back here. You have to understand DNA probably evolved once you're connected, but you're physically connected over time to everything that has DNA, everything. And so that's not going to make any difference in anybody's life, right?
Right.
And so I think it's just because we're evolved creatures. And this tinkering, it wasn't engineered or designed. It was a tinkering process.
Evolution is a tinkerer.
It's a tinkerer. And all the possible worlds, there's one actual world, and natural selection and sexual selection and tinkering is what explains it. There's no need for a designer. Until Darwin, look, you see a bird fly, that's amazing. You see a fish swim, that's amazing. But once you have natural selection to explain it, you no longer have to invoke miraculous events.
Dawkins said
And that's
that
understanding.
Dawkins said that before we had evolutionary theory, if you didn't believe in intelligent design, then you weren't paying attention.
Yeah.
You have to look at an evolved trait and say it exists for a purpose.
Yeah.
Which implies design before you have natural selection.
Right.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So it's not a wrong first step to understand sort of functionality, I guess.
Right.
You form is function.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so with the bias, even scientists, that's why you have to have open publication, critical review, things like that. For example, of bias. Here you have the Europeans spreading over the world, discovering all these different people and different creatures and fossils, and at the same time they're discovering, Lyell is figuring out geology in these ages of history. Well, here's a problem. If humans were created and designed, how do we explain all this variation amongst humans? Right? You have all these dark people over here and this. How do you explain that? Well, I can give you a quote from Oliver Goldsmith's The History of Animated Nature in the 18th century. How do you explain it? You say, well, all those other people have degenerated since the original pristine type. They have changed the most for the worst, whereas the European male especially has maintained that most atom-like quantity. What happened after Darwin? You have Haeckel saying it's the European Aryans that have evolved the most and changed the most from the original ape-like form. And there's the bias.
Right.
And it's ingrained in us, and it's so liberating, I think, to discover that and to realize that there's, as much as you can of reality, to bring it in and make sense of it. So it's that we're evolved creatures. We're not designed with an intelligent, we weren't designed to be intelligent scientists.
Nope.
Right. We've got a blunt tool to even understand our own evolutionary past, or the ramifications of it anyway.
And the implications are for death and for all sorts of things are not exactly things people like to understand.
Interesting that you used the word liberation.
Yeah.
I think in some Indian language, the Sanskrit, moksha, I think is the term for liberation. I'm probably wrong, but it's moksha or nirvana or
okay.
something. But to approach it from both ends, because the idea of liberation is older than Buddhism. And, the Buddha was taking very old ideas of his culture and then turned it into Buddhism.
Yeah.
But
He was tinkering.
he was, and he wasn't trying to explain the variations of animals. He
Yeah.
wasn't trying to be scientifically literate. But lo and behold, if you get scientifically literate enough, it does become a form of liberation, not all too different from Buddhist liberation, in my experience and in my understanding.
Yeah. Yeah.
The falling away of illusion.
Right, the seeing things as they are.
Yeah.
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 But of course, everyone, I mean, any ideology or philosophy or religion sort of claims that notion, no matter how different they are from one another. They all say, well, this is us seeing the true nature of things, right?
Right, but there's no, like, what books did the Buddha read the first time to make the first Buddhist texts? The world. He was basing it on simple observation, which is science is based on simple observation.
And making it available for critique and seeing if there's any fault in your logic. Darwin once said there's the biggest problem in science is something that's accepted as a fact that's not a fact. Theories people love to go after and try to correct, but if some people accept them as fact and it's not a fact, so I mean,
it's a hole in your thinking that everything else drains out of.
So I mean, I think one way to put it is, if we want to have understanding, we have to know the actual chronicle of life. And then what Darwin did was, and they both sort of came at once, the chronicle and the narrative. Darwin gave us the narrative, while meanwhile geology was figuring out how old the planet was. And then, of course, Darwin's biggest mistake, I think we might have talked about this before, when Lord Kelvin said, well, the Earth can't be any older than so much, maybe 200 million or 100 million years. I forget what Kelvin estimated, just based on not knowing about radioactivity, and he just had a hot body cooling off. Darwin had to speed up evolution, so then he adopted Lamarckian ideas. In order, because here was a fact, something accepted as a fact that was not a fact. And there are those.
This is a silly thing, but the first thing that came to my head was, say you're trying to diagnose a problem with your automobile. And so you order a new part that gets shipped overseas and shows up at your O'Reilly's or whatever. And you're problem shooting. You don't know what the problem is, but you know this part is new, so you forget. So I'm still looking for the problem, but I've ruled out this part I got shiny new from the store. But sometimes that part's bad. But you forgot to think about it anymore. And so you're never going to find the problem if you've got that fact that isn't a fact.
That's right.
Yeah. It's one of the...
How do you know? How do you know which facts are not facts?
I mean, even Einstein did it. He had his lambda constant to account for. They didn't know the universe was expanding, I think, and so he had to account for it in his math, and he called it the biggest stain on his career because he just fudged it. Here's this constant in the equation. Devastating, really.
Hilarious.
Even he cheated.
Yeah. And he knew it. He knew it when he did it.
Yeah,
too.
and he was good enough at math to be like, do this. And it didn't necessarily fool other people until the new facts.
This is Darwin literally adding a constant to his figures to scale up the time or scale down the time.
Yeah, it's the same.
It's
the same flaw
in a way.
One of the things when I was teaching, I'd say evolution. I'd pick something up and drop it. I said, gravity's a fact. I said, evolution is as much a fact as gravity, and people just don't buy it. They don't buy it. I actually, my oldest grandson just graduated from college, and he was one of the teachers he was talking to said, I remember your grandpa doing this, dropping this thing. And he actually said, I'm not sure I buy that evolution is a fact. I mean, this is a PhD in the humanities. He's a religion department, nice guy. But he's not sure he accepts that evolution is a fact the way gravity. In fact, it's a fact like gravity. We understand evolution better than we understand gravity.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
really do. Gravity is the one force that's been described, so
Yeah.
you can put something in orbit here or
Yeah.
swing it around Neptune to, or whatever.
Oh, geez, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's very well precisely
Right.
described. But here is an idea, and I argue that we understand evolution better. We have theories for senescence. Once you have sexual reproduction, you have senescence evolves. You don't have it in single-celled things in the way you do
Yeah.
programmed genetic senescence. And so we can actually have good theories in evolution to explain death and the grave. So we understand the grave better than we understand gravity.
Yeah.
That's my joke that I try to make out of it. But it's just hard for people to accept that they're mortal, that there was no design, there's no plan for them. I mean,
Well, to play devil's advocate here, you don't have to be a physicist to watch you drop a hammer in class and say, "Oh yeah, well I do." Obviously I believe in gravity because my mug fell off the table the other
Yeah.
day, where, like you were saying, describing before evolution was theorized.
Yeah.
You had no choice but to look at the flight
Sure.
of a bird and
Yeah.
think, "Boy, that bird was
designed.
well designed."
yeah.
Yeah.
Because look at that thing fly.
Yeah. And if you use the word design with a lowercase d, not designed by a designer,
Yeah.
then you can say it was designed by evolution.
Without
You know
agency,
what I mean?
right.
No
the
agency.
trouble
Yeah.
with even the lowercase
Yes,
d is
Yeah.
that
exactly.
little
Yeah.
bit of hint towards agency.
Right.
But yeah.
Which is wrong.
Right.
But if you
but it's
understand.
hard to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Which is
language
what the
problem,
deists,
but-
in a sense, were saying.
Yeah.
Franklin and a lot of people in the Enlightenment, they said God created the whole thing and then it worked out after that.
Set it
the,
in motion.
The great
Sure.
clock,
Yeah.
the great clockmaker or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is attractive,
Yeah.
Kind of, if you feel like you want it, if you feel like you need a deity, but you can also
Yeah.
still be slightly more scientifically responsible.
Right.
So
yeah.
evolution is just something God made.
Yeah.
Right, which in a way,
way.
that's almost more dishonest than
Yeah.
somebody who's just rabidly a religious fanatic, like, oh, well, I kind of want it both ways.
Right.
But it is true that evolution can't say there isn't a God. It's
Right.
just God is not necessary for explaining what we see.
Yeah.
I mean, all of the predictions that follow from Darwin, that means the earliest things should be single-celled. They should be much older than the multi-celled things, and that,
Yeah.
animals couldn't come around until after there was something to eat. And all of these things fit in. There are no really missing links anymore. I mean,
No.
from the origin of the limb to, one of the mysteries, and I haven't taught evolution now for 17 years. But I mean, what intrigues me is the origin of sex. And what I mean by sex is the origin of meiosis, where you have a cell divide and split it down into 4 cells with half the original DNA of the other cell,
Right.
and then have to fuse with another cell. And that the selection for that probably was parasitic forms. But
Right.
and that you had to alter the DNA. And once you had that, then the potential for selection to act on diversity increased exponentially with recombination.
Oh, that's something I remember. I think pondering about, and maybe even asking Adam about one time. But what you just said, that selection that acts upon diversity. So I can sort of, as a layman, understand clunkily the mechanics of natural selection or the selective process or whatever. But then I wondered about, could you select or for an adaptation that allowed for more mutation, or to actually change the rate or the acceleration of the mechanism?
Well, you can only
in a
tinker.
meta way.
You can only tinker. So if something happens and the environment favors it, then it can evolve. See, one of the things that happens with meiosis, when you have those chromosomes pairing up before they split, you can get this unequal crossing over.
Yeah.
What is that significant? Well, if you take a look at hemoglobin, it's a result of a bunch of gene duplications, probably most of whom you got unequal crossing over, where you all of a sudden get 2 of this locus on one thing, and then one can evolve a new function.
Yeah.
So that's something that provides for genetic diversity, then it's selection. But it was a tinkering process.
Okay.
Right.
So
What
there
it-
are
The
known
origin of
examples.
limbs is similar. You had basically in like primitive fish, even though there's no such thing as a fish, right?
That's what I hear.
You had there was a chromosomal doubling for a certain thing, and now you'll have an extra baggage of chromosomes that are kind of being pulled along, not fulfilling a function, and they can mutate away, and that provides kind of grist in the mill.
Wow.
So there's animals, there's whole lineages that
That
are
are
just
polyploid.
just
Yeah, and
boom, there it
that's
is.
really common in plants. And
It's a ploy.
Those lizards,
And
there's
lizards.
all those triploid, goofy,
yeah,
lizards.
triploid that become asexual.
Oh.
Asexual lizards.
Yeah.
Right, right.
There's like within a big species complex of like the sand rail or some, what are they called? The guys with the blue chest. Anyway, there's like a species complex in the American Southwest, and there might be 3 different asexual lineages that arose at different times. They're not related to each other.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, and they're parthenogenic, they're all female, and
I think it's Nematophorus is the genus, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I don't
Yeah.
remember. But
it's really quite something.
it's really something.
And you just, you're looking at this lizard and you go, it looks like all the other ones.
yeah.
But like in the valley over,
Yeah.
there's male and females. This one, there's only females
Right.
because of a genetic mistake.
Well, I mean, it seems like they're all mistakes.
They are.
Almost.
But and if you think about it, though,
irresponsible to say?
in the long, no,
A mismatch, a misoverlap.
all
sounds like a
mutations
mistake.
were originally mistakes.
They-
Yeah.
Sure.
A doubling,
Yeah.
that's a mistake,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. But and 99.999% of them are deleterious,
Right.
They're just,
Yeah.
and all those female lineages, those parthenogenic lineages are they're going to disappear. They
Extinction
can't evolve.
Oh, wow. They
can't evolve. Isn't that- yeah.
They've opted
Damn.
out. They've opted out. So
Yes.
selection
Yeah.
can no longer act upon them.
Oh, I just thought about
Whoa.
So they're dead ends.
that. Yeah.
Wow.
There's some,
I mean, I suppose something could happen genetically.
they would have to go back to sexual.
Which would be, that you can imagine how difficult
Holy
for
crap.
that to happen by tinkering.
And if they were triploid or something,
Yeah.
it's not, you can't even go back to sexual selection,
Yeah.
can you? It has to be an even number.
Yeah.
There's some plant in Australia
Has
or
to. This guy's pretty confident.
it's
over
just the
there.
math. It's just you can't evenly divide an odd number.
Yeah.
Oh. Right?
Right.
It seems so easy to employ human narratives of hunting and
Well, all the other mistaken adaptations seem pretty hard to imagine before they happen too. I
Fair enough.
And like
the universe is pretty big.
You
Okay.
were talking about this acquaintance of yours or an acquaintance of your grandson who said, "Yeah, I'm still not sure." I find myself when I discover, I learn about the life cycle of I can't think of a good example that sometimes even makes me slightly incredulous, but like
They get into the insects.
yeah, the insects and the parasites that need like 3 or 4 different hosts with
Right.
the perfect conditions. You start in the lake, you end up in this guy's gut. You
Yeah.
got to get eaten by
Sure.
a bird.
Yeah.
The bird has to win the lottery. He has to be left-handed.
Yep.
And then he has to get eaten by an alligator who's
Yeah.
shot by and then the parasite can
Well, and then you have these
reproduce,
parasites
yeah.
that actually control the behavior of the host
Yeah.
to increase their likelihood of getting to the next host,
Right,
Yes.
right.
to the next
Yeah,
stage. I mean, natural history. I mean, all of us are historians, all intellectuals. I said this before, historians. If you don't recognize that, you're not an intellectual. And natural history, just trying to understand all of those facts. That's what you need is the facts of the real life cycle. And once you have that, then you have to say, well, how could that happen? Biologists love to try to figure out how something evolved like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not enough data, not enough
Yeah.
comparative. Like it's like the physicists dealing with one universe. How do you?
Sure.
Yeah. Prove to me there's another.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Also hard to without anything to compare it to. It's
Yeah.
harder to understand how
Yeah.
the universe is put together.
Yeah.
Right.
One way to it's not even fact checking, but it's checking your own attitude towards it is just think of how many Star Trek stories that people have told themselves in science fiction stories and things where it's like, oh, there's this serum and if you inject it into you, it'll cause you can duplicate yourself, or like just all the different magical tropes and explanations for something to keep the movie going, to get to the conclusion of the movie. That's us imposing our social worldview
Our
onto,
constructs.
where we take the human social universe and impose it on the world. Because if you tried to flesh out the implications of any of those science fiction stories of like, well, if that's possible,
Yeah.
wouldn't that imply you can't do it? It
Yeah.
breaks down instantaneously, So that's a good way, like this isn't about lazy thinking. This isn't a podcast about lazy thinking, at least this episode, but
They make those. There are podcasts.
Boy, I mean, if you were to even think about like, well, are you telekinetic? Are you able to use the Force in Star Wars? Well, do you pass it on to your children? Wouldn't you then like want to get together with another person who's really good with the Force just to make a stronger baby?
So this is your way to remember that we bring this baggage with us wherever we go, including when we're trying to understand which direction a quark spins. Do they spin? They've got spin, don't they? It doesn't matter. Not a physics podcast either.
No.
But the thing is, it's very difficult to avoid bias, and what this instrument science does is give us a method for doing that.
Right.
And sometimes,
Or our best
I mean, humans.
attempt at it.
We're human. All scientists are humans.
Right.
Yeah.
They were born in a particular culture with a particular language at a particular time, and that influences what they think.
Yeah.
Right.
Not very long ago, they were a monkey using stone tools
Yeah.
on the East Plains of Africa. Not very long ago at all.
Not very long at all. That's right.
In that sense, speaking of evolution, the way, from the perspective of natural selection, a stone that a caddisfly uses to construct its case out of is as much a part of the phenotype of that insect as the molecules that it builds its own body with. And you must make the distinction. The hard line is between genotype and phenotype. Mm-hmm. And phenotype is just this endless, nebulous, asymptotic thing. Like what isn't a phenotype?
Yeah.
How far can a phenotype go? You talked about parasites controlling behavior. Well, if I look at the physical chemical body of a parasite, it's this little white grub that lives inside of another animal. But its phenotype is
that other animal.
Is also that other animal.
That's right.
It's
That's
using
right.
it as a just because it's using it as a puppet, so is its own body.
Right.
Yeah.
The phenotype is the puppet, but the Geppetto is the genotype.
And-
Everything else is phenotype.
We
Your body is a puppet of your genes in the long.
Right. So if I'm driving a car, there's not a big difference between where the puppet ends.
Yeah.
As far as
Yes.
I'm a human, I'm
Yes.
I'm pretty good at puppeting things.
Yes.
Eh,
And in that
And
sense,
so-
the culture of science is this phenotypic thing that we've built, like a caddisfly builds its little shell of stone around itself. And that's it's surprisingly precious.
Right.
Because take that away, take a young kid, throw him on an island somewhere, a modern human, throw him on an island. No, they don't have written language. It's gone.
It's gone.
It's gone.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, actually, I have to make a pitch for Richard Dawkins because that's the example he uses. Richard Dawkins
I stole from him.
felt that his most original contribution to evolutionary theory was the extended phenotype.
Yes.
And he starts with the caddisfly and
Yes.
builds from that. And he feels that's what he did.
Wow.
And by what we're talking about Dawkins, for anybody listening here, if they want to understand the narrative of evolution, how this process has worked, read The Selfish Gene. If you want to understand a really elegant description of the chronicle in the sequence of evolution leading to humans, read The Ancestor's Tale. It's a great book. It's a long book, but it talks about the various where Ancestor's Tale is based on Canterbury Tales, where all of a sudden this visitor comes and talks about, well, say goodbye to the fish. Now you're in this tetrapod lineage, and this is when these things evolved and stuff like that. It's just an elegant description, but the extended phenotype, that's right. I mean, so you have these parasites controlling behavior to maximize, it doesn't make it certain, but to maximize their probability of getting, those genes maximizing
genes,
their
right,
probability
right. No,
of getting to the next generation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was that also Dawkins sort of, or is this related to the extended phenotype? The fact that it's wrong to think about, if we're trying to be responsible evolutionary thinkers, it's wrong to think about even individuals or species.
Rediscovering the organism.
But
Is how he said it. Yeah.
right, but
That's what you're
even
describing.
smaller. It's the selfish gene.
Yes.
It's not the selfish me.
Yeah. It's not even the selfish nucleus of a cell.
Right.
Because even that is phenotype. It's the gene itself.
Right.
And it's not even the selfish chromosome.
A chromosome, if it doesn't recombine, can be selfish because it's inherited as a unit.
Yes, yeah.
And if there's then it can evolve if there's other variations of that unit. So the best way to describe it, the smaller the genetic unit of recombination
Yeah.
is the selfish gene.
So in fact, we're all hosts, and
Yes.
the
We're all
genes
hosts,
are and the genes
exactly.
are the proto.
Yeah.
We're all
parasite.
puppets.
The
You
arc,
use the
the
words.
parasite, the parasite
Yeah.
is the gene.
Yeah. And what a pathetic thing, because think about it even this way. A gene is not adenosine, guanine. What are they?
ATGP,
Yeah.
adenosine,
How did I fuck this up?
thymine.
Guanine,
Guanine,
adenine. It's
adenine.
not even that. It's the pattern that they're in.
Ah,
It's the information. It's the
Even
sequence.
yes,
and it's
even
it's
even the,
geometry again.
yes, even the strand of DNA is a puppet from the information encoded
from the
above.
bits of this, whatever that base is on that side is going to match with that base. But mistakes happen.
It's a pattern.
You know,
It's
one of the reasons they think
the,
that
the substrate is arbitrary. It's the information.
Yes.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
fact that it's
You could have digital genes.
guanine,
yeah,
As long as they can
it's
reproduce themselves.
Incidental.
yeah.
Yes. Yes. And we have
Could be Legos.
uracil in RNA. Here's a different nucleic acid.
Well, and so the question, I don't know, this is again 25 years ago. The question is, uracil, what's it doing there? Well, they think that uracil might have been the
Original. Yeah.
ones, but it's more prone to make
Awesome.
mistakes when it duplicates.
Yeah.
So what you do, it's cheaper to make, so you can put it out in the ribosomes. It's very expensive, you know. You just
Yeah.
save energy, so you can have it in the ribosomes functioning for proteins. But that doesn't go on with the selfish
Because it's
gene.
recycled.
So
yeah.
if you have uracil, you have the thymine or whatever it is. Then if you have that, you have more precise information passed on, less likely to be mistaken to the next generation.
Is there a theoretical sweet spot for the rate of mistakes? Because mistakes are necessary for selection to act upon,
Yes.
right? The mutations.
I'm going to go back to what you said
Yeah.
earlier. You asked if there is an evolutionary aspect to increase
Can you ratchet up? Right.
increase mutation. So one thing to keep in mind is that a tremendous amount of DNA and the biochemical machinery of a cell is devoted to the replication and translation and maintenance of genetic material. It's a lot of it is recursive. Like this gene exists to repair damage to genes, right? So a whole lot of it is just the maintenance of the genetic code,
Right.
and then the transcription, translation of it into its actual function. So there's a lot of grist in that mill for natural selection to work upon. Of like, oh, there was a mutation in your repair mechanism. That means your mutation rate is going to tick up because you're not repairing it anymore. It seems that natural selection, that mysterious Tao above all of it, selects very hard against it.
Right. It
So
would make sense.
It
would
does.
make some sense.
it does.
And then it just made me think of sex too, because that's a
Yes.
way to get new combinations, but they're reliable. They're
Well,
not mistakes, right? Most of the
But
time.
that's why meiosis becomes so interesting. But it's probably because of parasitic DNA, and you have to alter the DNA because some parasites can overcome that. That was the idea. That one of the arguments floated from
the Red Queen
the
hypothesis.
selective pressure for the origin of something like meiosis would be that other DNA is honing in on your DNA, and if you don't change it, something's going to figure it out, and you're gone.
But to really get to that, if you think about, strangely enough, a strand of DNA, it's not the DNA itself, that's just a puppet, but the information coded in that DNA is it is evolved knowledge about the world. It's knowledge.
a particular environment.
Yeah, I know.
Oh,
How do I
right.
know what I know?
A local.
Yeah,
A local
yeah.
truth.
I make this information forms this protein, and the protein has a function, and it's a real function. It's not randomly out there, and it's almost impossible to describe how precise it is. Like, this thing does this one specific thing, and there's nobody behind it, but it is better planned out and more precise and disciplined than anything our design brains have done.
Well, it's in a way
It
it's
knows.
brute forced.
Yes,
You
by
know.
by billions of years
Right,
of natural
it's like-
selection, but it's competent and it's real knowledge. It's like, this protein binds to oxygen. You know, that's what it's there for. It's not randomly doing things. So how does new knowledge come into the world? How does new information come into the world? That's because you don't know what that knowledge means before natural selection acts upon it. That's why you don't see genetic code that increases the rate of mutation, because it could exist, but evolution keeps knocking that out. Natural selection keeps doing it because it probably just winds out of control.
Right.
So that's when those mutations are genuine mistakes.
Yeah.
It's a roll of the dice, but nobody's even rolling the dice. And maybe one out of a
But
trillion.
even the rate of mistakes has already been regulated, already
Yes.
equalized.
as good as they can.
Selection has
Right.
acted on it.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
sure.
right,
Yeah, yeah.
And it could, if environment changes, it might change that.
right.
Oh, of course it does.
So I mean, that's the sort of thing that that is so. neat.
But the human mind is very drawn to one-to-one correlations. It likes that. That's easy to think about.
Yeah.
Oh, if the tree gets shaded, it changes its chlorophyll pattern a little bit. You have change, response, one-to-one. Nature is not like that. There are so many forces at work with such subtlety. It's almost
Well,
the mind recoils.
and you
The
always,
human mind recoils.
right, and you have to keep in mind the importance of variation. I mean, there's variation in all populations, basically. I mean, obviously in the whip-tailed lizards,
Yeah,
there's
whip
less.
that's it. Yeah.
but there's variation, and what's Darwin's really revolutionary insight was the importance of variation, not essences like Plato would have us
Yeah.
believe. That things have essences, and of course this is the human way of thinking. A lot of this
Yes.
today about the blacks and whites and stuff like that, it's essentialist thinking.
Right.
It's that in that black there's something essentially black, and white there's something it's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
It's not. And so to get to that variation is what's so important.
My thought experiment that brought me out of essentialist thinking was, I was thinking about rabbits of all thing, and like pikas are also little rabbits.
Okay.
They're lagomorphs, right?
Yeah.
And one of them looks like a mouse basically, and one of them is a rabbit. And I realized, like, hey, just give it time, and lagomorphs could replace every niche currently occupied by rodents.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's no such thing as rabbitness.
Ah, right.
Just as
Right.
there's no such
Convergent evolution
Yeah.
exposes the lie of essentialism.
Sure. And there were other instances.
It's like sometimes if it's dusk, I'm not sure if I'm seeing a bat or a swallow because I mean, I'm sure a bat expert knows their flight pattern.
course.
But,
Yeah.
but again, it's dusk, so you can't see it very clearly.
No, I understand.
And they're occupying a very similar niche.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One's daytime, one's nighttime.
Right.
Yeah.
But this essentialist thinking, that's one of our. That's a human trait.
And what? Well,
Yeah.
Would you
Like-
say it's human or would you say it's Western?
Probably more Western. But,
Yeah,
but-
Buddhism, man, no
Yeah,
essence, no
yeah.
selfhood,
Yeah,
no
more
selfness.
And we're so proud of our philosophical inheritance from Plato and Aristotle. you
I
know?
was. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
I bought that hook, line, and sinker. You
Yeah.
had the Greeks gave us
Oh,
logic and
it's so
philosophy. The Romans
stupid.
gave us law. And, and then you have these white males invented science. I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Probably referenced this before at this table, but I mean, Carl Sagan lays it out. I'm sure I own the book, but I haven't read it. But the original TV series, he lays it out with these early Ionian thinkers, and he's like, everyone's got a big hard on for Plato and Pythagoras, and these guys suck. I mean, they had, he doesn't write them off completely because
No.
they were good for some things, but they sort of mystical thinking, not open knowledge. You know, these are
Yeah.
esoteric secrets for only the privileged few. And
You read-
and the fact that we inherited that, and he speculates, you know, if we would have inherited these other Ionian paradigms, you know, who were
Right.
contemporary, in the long run, we might have been on Venus by now. You know,
I mean,
with
from-
better thinking.
I've read the Wikipedia article on Aristotelianism, and I feel genuinely sorry for the man, because he sincerely wanted to understand the world. And you can sit there and be like, yeah, this is the bay on this Greek island where he futzed around on his boat looking at all these animals and he sincerely wanted to understand it.
Yeah.
And I feel bad for him, because what he did is he built a mental structure for himself with the best tools he had at his time, with utter sincerity, and he was completely wrong.
Yeah.
And you have to start, and if you want to understand the world scientifically, you have to start out by rejecting Plato, Aristotle, Socrates. You have to be like, nope, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas you can still read the great learning. Let's not veer it in
Let's
that direction.
not, and you made me think of earlier when you were talking about your gravity demonstration. It reminded me of I love buying like children's books at Goodwill or whatever to learn about things I don't know much about. They're a great way to get an in to a subject, you know, get the vocabulary, get the lingo down. Anyway, I found this old like primary school science book, and I don't know if this is entirely true, but it stuck with me. But it was sort of making the case that Galileo was the first proper scientist, right? Because Aristotle watched a rock fall to the earth, and he asked, why did the rock fall to the earth? And he might answer, well, they both share the essence of earthness. Yeah. The earth is a big earth. The rock is a smaller version of the earth. It wants to be together.
Yeah.
So that's his explanation. And Galileo asked, how does the data
describe it mathematically?
Describe it. And I know that science does both, right?
Yeah, it does. It has
Modern
to.
science tries. Like you were saying, we still don't understand the mechanism of gravity, right?
Yeah.
We can describe it and model it and predict it
Yeah.
perfectly accurately, right? Enough to get satellites and enough to account for relativity, right? So we know how it behaves. So we've got the how down, but science still tries to question why. But I thought that was an interesting distinction, where Aristotle says why and Galileo said how
Yeah.
and measured.
Yeah,
you know.
measured. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so important.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Cosmos. I want to make a pitch for you guys should watch the new Cosmos,
Yeah.
because it brings in all of this geochemistry history and more of Darwin, and the fact that we humans have to make a choice. Are we capable of making a choice for the future of the planet? It's really a great series.
Yeah.
I'll have to.
It really is a great series.
With your recommendation, I might.
I
give
mean,
it another
it
chance.
obviously it has some razzle dazzle stuff, but
It has to.
It has to.
Yeah.
But it's trying to reach beyond the choir. I'm a member of the choir.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
trying to
Right.
reach beyond, and I just think it's elegant, and it poses the question to the reader at the end, or the viewer at the end: can we make these choices? I mean,
Yeah. I'll say another. I'll make my pitch, and it's not even a criticism, but the Richard Feynman lectures are all there on,
Yeah.
and he made in one of our previous ones we talked. You said that, well, is light a particle or a wave?
Yeah.
And you said, well, it's both. And Feynman makes the point: no, it's not a particle and it's not a wave. It has its own properties.
yeah.
You know, it is itself.
It is.
It is not a particle.
Sure.
It is not a wave. It has its own
Yeah.
describable properties.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So don't try to say by trying to fit it in two boxes
It's a-
and then say
it's a
it's one.
mistake.
Yes,
It's a
It's
mistake.
a
It
cognitive
is.
mistake.
It is.
And if you think about it, like, oh, you say it's a particle and a wave. What's a particle?
Right.
What's a wave?
Also,
you think you say the word.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
say the word. Oh, it's a wave. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
at the very beginning of the question is a hint to is,
Yes.
right? Rather than how
Yeah.
how does light behave?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes it behaves
Yeah.
like what we call particles. Sometimes it behaves like what we call waves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's we?
Yeah.
And what do we mean by particles and waves in the first place? Like I've seen the
Sure,
double slit.
but-
I've done the double slit experiment myself with Dr. Rich Louie at POU because it blew my mind.
Yeah.
I'm this young neophyte. Oh, let's do it. And in the end, it looks like a barcode scanner on the wall, but
Real exciting.
yeah, whoop-de-doo. And it's
the
trivial.
implications are pretty
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah, Ugh.
But not to be too, I mean, it's easy to say, well, what's a particle? I mean,
Right.
we use these models to help us understand and predict.
sure.
And these things are robust enough that most of the time they're useful to
Yeah.
help us
But it's
understand
hard.
and predict.
It's hard to remember all the time that it's a model.
Yes.
That's the problem.
Yes, and thank you for reminding me because that is something that's always frustrated me. Once I realized that, I might have mentioned this too, but once I realized that, I resented the fact that no one ever reminded me of that
Yeah.
in school,
Yeah.
in
Yes,
elementary
yes.
school.
Yeah.
It's
You
a
get-
real problem.
You
It
get
is a
the
problem.
you get the Niels Bohr model of the atom,
Oh,
and you
yeah.
think if you had magic eyesight, that's what an atom would look like.
Oh,
They,
I mean,
they-
that happened to me
they
in college.
Don't remind you
I mean,
it's a
getting,
model.
I was getting my first atomic structure in college in a chemistry class,
Yeah.
and that's what it presented.
Yeah.
And it
Which
was
is
never,
fine.
well, it was never emphasized. It was a model,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
like you say, and it's a real problem.
It's
u-
so
use-
bad. It's
useful-
such a betrayal of young people because they could get it. It's not like, oh no, if I don't think an electron is like a billiard ball whizzing around, my whole world will
Right.
fall apart.
They-
what will I do? It's
they
like,
could
come
get it.
on.
Yeah.
You could tell that to a fifth grader, and they'd be like, wow.
You
There's
mean
no-
I can use this model to help
Yeah.
predict how chemicals interact?
Are you telling me we don't really know? Hell yeah.
Yeah.
You don't have to give them certainty.
Yeah.
No,
You don't.
no.
You don't
No.
at all.
So thanks,
They have the
once
courage.
again, thanks for the reminder.
Yeah.
Because no one,
No.
when I was a kid, no one told me they were models.
Relative.
They
You know,
told
you-
me they were the universe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not ways
This
of
is what it
understanding
is.
and predicting
Yeah,
the
it's-
universe.
yeah.
This is what it is.
The atom is a miniature solar system.
Yes.
Exactly.
That's one of those facts you talked about that if it's wrong, it's a hole in the bucket and you can't fill it.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Well, does an electron hit another electron?
Yeah. But, well, you mentioned that, bringing that up, it reminds me, I taught oceanography also, and always the textbooks to explain the tides, you have to know the phases of the moon for the strong neap tides, or the spring tides and the neap tides. And so you have the moon with the sun on the same side as the sun or the earth, or on the opposite side. Then you have bigger tides, and when it's at the cross,
Right.
up or down, then it's weaker tides. And they always draw it as if the moon is going around the earth like this.
The center of the earth.
How can the moon go that way? If you block the moon, that means it would have to all of a sudden reverse and then move the other direction. And it doesn't do that. It's always moving east. So it's got to, I'm not sure if it's a sine wave or a leapfrog. And it's not much, but it's not something where it reverses direction. It's either like this or it's like that.
Yeah.
And it's not much, but it's always presented that way.
The gravity of the moon offsets the center of the gravity of the earth if the earth had no moon. It pulls it off to the side towards the moon.
Yeah. And so it's just, the Earth has a slight wobble
Yeah.
because of this, and the moon has a slightly bigger wobble
Yeah.
because of that, but they're always moving in the same direction. So, I mean, just again, here's a model that's used. I mean, it helps you understand what spring tides and neap tides are. But, and I taught that for a while, and I started thinking, it can't be that way. It can't be that way. And of course it can't. But again, we very easily slip into things that simplify the world to help us understand it, that fit our preconceived views in a way,
Right.
And also, it just popped into my head again. I think it's a Buddhist little parable, right? But just because the raft helps you get across the river doesn't mean to carry it on your back for the rest of the journey. So this thing is useful so long as it is.
That's it.
And
And
that's-
once it's not useful anymore,
And
you
that's-
got to be able to lay it aside.
And that's what the great thing about the American contribution to philosophy, pragmatism. try it, and if it works, if it doesn't work, try something different. There are no these simple, universal philosophical axioms that will lead to a happier Earth. I mean, that's really what you have to do. You have to give up this idea if it no longer works,
Yeah.
and try variations and things like that.
I thought you were going to go with the parable of like the 5 blind men and the elephant.
Oh, that's a good one too.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh no, it's like a rope. No,
Yeah.
it's like a tree.
Yeah. They're not wrong.
No. Oh, it's like a particle. Oh, it's like a wave.
The 2 blind men and the photon.
Is that so? I mean,
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not
is
so
that
different.
even a leap?
No.
Yeah.
It's not even a leap. It's
Yeah.
the same. You
Yeah.
know.
Well, bringing up the tides, I think I might have mentioned this in one of our conversations before, but with the moon and the sun, there's 2 coincidental facts. The moon seems to be about the same size as the sun
Right.
from the Earth. I mean, think about that. Full solar eclipse.
That's pretty fun.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a coincidence.
Yeah.
Truly.
And the other thing is, at least now, I'm not sure over geologic time, it's not true, I don't think, but now if you go to the northern hemisphere in the winter, that's when the full moon is like, it can be up as 28 degrees north in the winter. So there's plenty of moonlight. It doesn't set.
Mm-hmm.
And the same is true in the southern winter. It's down there, so you have all that. So you have those 2 coincidental facts. The third fact, if I said this before, Newton died in the year by this calendar,
Oh,
the
yeah.
same number as about the same depth in kilometers of the center of the mass between the Earth and the Moon. So I asked, did Newton get the point, or did the point get Newton?
Right. Which calendar mugs? The Persian calendar?
No,
or
this
the
this-
Assyrian calendar?
By this calendar, by
Right.
this calendar, and of course the kilometer was also defined at about the time
Oh yeah.
after Newton was there. It'd be very interesting. Meter, I mean kilometer. I mean there wasn't even defined. I don't think
Yeah.
precisely until after Newton was dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean it's just a way of making a joke.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like how many hundreds of years from now, I wonder if they're going to say, why is 0 degree longitude, longitude, why does that go through London? I don't think.
Yeah.
Well,
I saw maps. I did biogeography of oceanic things, and there's one guy in Russia who was working with similar types of fishes in the ocean on a worldwide scale. He had his worldwide maps, and guess where 0 degrees went through? Moscow.
sure.
On the
Right.
maps.
Of course.
Now I don't know if that was a dig at Moscow,
Right.
or if this was something that they were catering to somebody above, but in the bureaucracy. But I suspect it was a dig at the bureaucracy, because these scientists in Russia at the time, they couldn't travel. They had to. I mean, it was really bad.
It was Soviet
Yeah.
times. Yeah.
0 degrees.
Yeah.
I've been to the Greenwich Museum. It's so fun. That's one of the best museums I've ever been in. Because the reason I bring this up, because of longitude, that's where you see where they established Greenwich Mean Time, the 0 degree longitude. You have latitude is you got an equator, 2
Yeah,
poles.
yeah.
That's no problem. You can just major angles, but you have to artificially establish a reference
right.
point for longitude. And if you're going to do that, you need to have good clocks.
Yeah.
And so you see all these chronometers that people
Yeah.
were competing for prizes to try to come up with a chronometer, so you could keep track of time.
Yeah. And then you contrast that with like some of those seabirds where they capture some little albatross or tern, put him in a pitch black box with some air holes in it, fly him 5,000 miles away, let him out, and he's back home in 24 hours. There's animals can do true navigation, latitude and longitude. Some animals. They've evolved
And they're
for
still not entirely sure how. Is that true? I've heard that about, like, they're still studying pigeons to
it.
understand.
Yeah. They're working on it. I don't think.
I think
it's fully-
there's evidence. Certainly, they use the magnetic field.
Yeah.
They use the stars, and probably the height of the sun with the time of
Yeah,
the
they
year.
can do that, yeah.
Similar things to what,
and a polarization of light,
and the polarization of light.
sunlight. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean,
Right.
It's a pretty good trick.
well, I mean, that's
Here's a fucking bird that can you could grab an albatross and have a transporter and go, I'm going to transport you to the other side of the Pacific Ocean. And he's like, oh, I know where I am. I know where home is.
Right.
Yeah.
Point and go.
and not to
How
be-
long did it take humans to do? It's not like the bird pulls out his scratch pad and does
Okay,
the math.
but you know what I can do?
Yeah.
Play ping pong.
Yeah.
And do you know what it takes to return a shot
Right.
to the other side?
Monkeys are really good at hitting small things, aren't they?
But I have learned intuitive understanding of even the spin on this little sphere.
Absolutely,
And
you
I
do.
use my big clunky limb and the angle of the racket.
Isn't it weird that a monkey that's good at thinking about spinning spheres would use spinning spheres as its atomic model?
Oh, interesting.
Why did we go looking for particles? Is that one of those implicit evolved biases?
A bias towards particles.
Yeah.
Do we have a bias towards particles and Newtonian
we have
thinking?
we have a spherical bias.
Why is it that relativity is a very revolutionary and hard to get idea, but particle physics, bonk, 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 isn't?
Yeah.
What if we were some other species where we'd go, oh, relativity, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, if I'm in a high gravity, if I'm
But
moving,
we're
I
really
would.
comfortable thinking about billiard balls.
But yeah, billiard balls, what the hell? This is all fucked up.
You know, that sort of reinforces my
Fly on the wall.
I maintain that throw thing at thing is the proto game. You know, throwing a rock at a tree or
You could-
throwing a rock at another rock
At a rabbit.
or a rabbit. Oh
something.
yeah, of course.
Sure.
Yeah.
Dude, growing up in Montana, that was what I did. You go into the woods and throw rocks at things.
Right.
I remember vividly during winter it was Doug Serwinski, Jesse Hanna, a few other guys. It was like
Doxing them.
fourth
Doxing
grade.
them.
Right. Sean Dietrich. There was a frozen river below us, on a hillside, and we just sat there and threw rocks at it, and it would pop bubbles
yeah.
under the ice, and you'd see the bubbles go, and then we try to hit the bubbles.
Sounds like a good time.
It was awesome. It was so fun. We did it for like an hour.
But yeah, what I
Blonk, blonk, blonk. Like, what are you getting out of this?
yeah.
Having had one son and 4 grandsons, I can tell you boys love to throw things.
Yeah. Damn.
They do, not girls.
Yeah.
I mean, it's boys. I mean, that's
It's
again
true.
a limited sample. I have. I mean,
It's true.
4 grandsons.
And-
I'll
Anecdotal.
verify you. I'll be your peer review on
Yeah.
that. I'll sign up.
Anecdotal.
Yeah, it is anecdotal, but I mean, that's what I'm picking up sticks, anything, or
Yeah.
rocks. I mean, it's just a.
I remember me and this one other kid, not very far from the ice throwing rock thing. There was a stick sticking out of a ponderosa pine, and we spent like 20 minutes trying to break the stick. It was just like, you had to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I just think it's interesting that the games we would recognize now as games are really not that many abstractions away. Target shooting,
Archery.
billiards. I mean,
Football.
even football. Of course, you've got the added element of the sort of meat grinder. But still, throw thing at a thing.
Basketball.
Yeah, basketball.
Golf.
Throw thing at thing.
Hit it with a stick.
Tennis.
Yep.
Could you train a monkey? Could you train a common chimpanzee to play ping pong? Maybe. I don't know. They like to throw things.
Yeah.
Would he
And-
like
and-
it? Dum, ba-dum,
And I wasn't trying to brag about my ping pong prowess, but it just occurred to me that the thing I was doing, like the calculations I was making in an instant, even before the ball crosses the net. Like sometimes you already react. You have to.
Oh, yeah.
So I mean,
Oh, God.
the just like the physics, and I think actually someone told me that with these sorts of operations, you might actually build a physical analog in your brain.
Yes, you do.
Right.
I
Which
know that
is-
from a bird
which
study
is
we read.
crazy to think about, but it would make it make more sense almost because
No.
they're very subtle things.
Like we're talking about patterns and like information encoded. They have sat there and dissected the brains of barn owls. Barn owls can pinpoint a mouse from sound in 3-dimensional space in absolute darkness. There's not a photon
Under
in
the
the room.
snow.
Yes. And they sit there and they can study like it's some corpus corpulosum or something in the brain, and the neurons fire in a similar pattern as the mouse moving based
It's not even an abstraction.
It's
it's an analog.
it's an analog neural map made from the sound waves coming into their ears.
That's wild.
I would almost guarantee you that we are one of the best visual animals out there. You have fabulous vision relative to a pig, cow, bear, seal. The only things better than you are like eagles. You know, we are great. We are the seeing ape. I guarantee you, there's a part of your brain that does almost what the owl does with sound, you do with sight. It's almost precognition,
Right.
because what's cognition? It comes later, a little bit later in the firing pattern. Speaking of bias, of course when you try to explain something to somebody, you say, hey, well, try to visualize it like this. And our eyes look up like that and we go, oh yeah, I can visualize that. A relationship that might have no visual component whatsoever. Yeah. What would you say if you were a dolphin, echolocation species? Well, try to audiolize this, right?
Yeah.
Try to hear it like this.
Yeah.
Hear about it like this in your mind's ear. Not your mind's eye, your mind's ear.
But
well, they wouldn't be looking up, would they?
No.
They'd be turning inward.
Back to the barn owl and me on a ping pong table.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah.
I had to habituate those instincts. I had to develop those. Those didn't come prepackaged. I mean, again, it's an abstraction, although it's not too much of an abstraction from, something that might be hardwired as far as hunting or
I'm sure
throwing something at a rabbit.
Your neurons made new connections or enhanced connections or something like
plasticity,
that.
Neural plasticity.
Right.
As you practice.
But, it required practice.
Yeah.
Sure. So is that an important distinction between the barn owl and me? Or the two tricks we were talking about anyway?
They probably have to learn it when they're young. I'm sure they make a lot of mistakes when they're first flying and whatnot. Some systems are not plastic. They're set. It's basically
they come batteries included or pre-assembled.
Like a young snake responds to slug, pheromones to go eat them, and it just goes after it. There's no learning process.
Right.
The genetics just make a system.
That machine comes turned on.
Yes. Probably a spider web is similar to that.
Yeah. Too. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, they're not. They just go do it.
They don't have to. They don't suck at making spider
webs
webs.
Others,
there's a simple algorithm. It's built into the nervous system. How you go this far, and then you do this, and this many steps, and this angle, and
right.
But that would be something that would probably be more genetically programmed and less plastic.
Whereas you get a big brain, and it's
like mine.
Yeah, and nature's like, okay, I'm gonna make this thing, and then that thing has to go and be plastic on its environment. It's like I'm gonna build a glove, but the surface of the glove can conform to different shapes, and I don't know what those shapes are gonna be. And here we are, monkeys, talking, and
right.
We're evolved for East Africa to hunt megafauna.
Well, maybe that's a bad metaphor.
It creates something.
Software is variable.
Yep.
Depending on where we go.
Yes.
But what we inherited from our ancestors is a nice big machine that can run a lot of different software.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than inheriting a really good web machine, specialized,
right.
baked in.
If evolution wants to change the shapes of webs, it has to work on the statistical average of genetics of a given spider population. If it wants to change the neural structure of your brain, it doesn't necessarily have to do that. It might just, well, what language did you grow up speaking?
Yeah. I mean, consider the owl. I mean, it's just...
Oh.
I actually was fortunate when I taught in Fairbanks that one winter. I was out snowshoeing and I saw these wing prints in the snow.
Oh, damn.
It took me a minute to figure out, was that a raven? Then I realized it had to be an owl, probably a great gray owl. I'd heard them. I never saw one up there, but I heard them. But here's, out in the middle of this snow, these wing prints that were,
with like a hole in the middle from the pounce.
Yeah, but I couldn't tell whether it got anything,
Yeah, damn. Yeah.
That's a nice find. I'm still pretty excited that I happened upon slug sex in my front yard.
Oh yeah,
Or
that's a
go
fun
read
one.
about it. Read about slug sex.
Dude,
No,
they're
serious-
wild.
I mean,
Yeah.
they have these harpoons that they
Yeah.
and stuff that they want the other one to be the female, so that they can use less energy and just sperm.
Yeah.
I mean, go read about slugs.
Talk about battle of the sexes.
Yeah.
Well, I've got both.
Yeah,
Well, say, I mean, I was talking about the origin of sex. Well, sex is not necessarily male and female. There's lots of things that aren't male and female. Then you have the origin of males and females.
Yeah.
Then you have it gets much more complicated all the way up to internal fertilization. And a lot of this is not just natural selection, it's sexual selection. Darwin's other great insight. Not just who can survive the strongest. Obviously, males fighting each other, that's that. But sometimes it's females are choosing. And
Sometimes.
well,
that's when
Whoa.
that's when I start getting confused. Like the.
Oh man, I got one for you. Sorry to.
No.
So in the thought experiment of imagine if thermodynamics ran the other way, leaving gravity out of it, where chemical reactions instead of having less order, they became more disordered. Well, if that was the case, animals would eat disorder and poop out diamonds, right? Right? Because the universe is now ticking
If
up.
you say so.
Sure, right? You would because chemical reactions would run the other direction. So the water wheel is still there. That's life running on a gradient. And so now the water wheel is simply turning the other way. So instead of whenever you disturbed a system, it would become more ordered naturally on its own instead of like our own universe where it becomes disordered, right? In that universe, male and female would still exist and sex would still exist because it's only about the time stamp of energy harvesting value. That's when females invest more in their offspring because they're stuck with it. Whereas males have the option of not, of walking away and having a different investment horizon for their own necessary investment.
So you're saying they're just two different values for the same variable, right? The time scale, the investment.
Yeah, strangely enough. And
One
so,
is just bigger than the other or smaller than
yeah,
the other.
and it's not, and of course, there's no more, I'm not moralizing, but I think it's really cool to think about. Well, even if you lived in a universe where thermodynamics ran the other way, you would still have the battle of the sexes and that male-female polarity would still exist, even in a universe that was completely flipped, you know?
I look forward to your short story.
Well, I'm just speaking of that, for imagination about sex, read The Left Hand of Darkness by
Oh, it's
Ursula Le
great.
Guin. It's a great
Yeah.
book. Where just with the imagination to imagine alternative, can the king be pregnant?
Yeah.
This sort of thing. It's just
Yeah.
a wonderful book.
Yeah.
It really is.
And she's so good at the subtlety of it. Like she can just take a thought experiment and running it down to a conversation between two people in a tent, you know. Because I mean, you know, we're all sexual beings, and it's an astonishing thing. But you know, to sit there, and you get bitter about stuff, or you like think, you know, you approach bitterness about things of like, well, you know, why is it like this? Well, if I was living in a different universe, it would still be confronted with that. It's only
Now-
time. Time is the only thing you need to create male and female.
But in your
Evolution.
thought experiment,
Yeah.
does that also reverse the order of causality as well?
It doesn't matter. The arrow of causality is, if you're on it, it's the same.
Okay.
So our universe ends in complete disorder.
Entropy.
Entropy, the heat death. Their universe ends in complete order. Basically, the Big Bang runs backwards and it turns, and you're like, what's the point? What's the point of it all? Why would I bother? Everything's just going to end up in this giant gem of quark material where nothing more can change because it can't get any more ordered.
Yeah.
Instead of any more disorder.
Instead of any more disorder.
But they start to sound like the same thing all of a sudden.
form and void.
The it is never two, dude.
Our universe ends in complete disorder where it's completely flat and then you rip a hole in it and it starts over. But if thermodynamics is different, apparently you end up with this giant thing of complete order and then it implodes and I don't know, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But so meiosis, it might be something that evolved to overcome multicellularity.
Not to overcome. It probably allowed it. I mean, multicellularity, meiosis preceded multicellularity. The first sexual things are single-celled.
Right.
And multicellular
Okay.
beings would have come after that. It probably had to do with you got anything that could juggle its DNA is going to overcome some parasite that has.
But then why don't? Okay, so but bacteria and their viruses revolve around each other. Like bacteria can
Well, they can conjugate. They have plasmids. They can get variation that way. It's asexual reproduction, but variation can be introduced by viruses or plasmids exchanging plasmids.
Right. So why would natural selection have to, since the DNA of bacteria is so variable anyway, and there's so many mutations, why would natural selection need to even? It's already mutating essentially as fast as it possibly can.
Again, it's been almost 20 years.
I don't
and I haven't
understand
followed it. That was my favorite topic to try to follow.
Right.
But one of the best guesses that the origin of meiosis had to do with anything that could generate variation in the face of overwhelming numbers of parasites. That if you have a common DNA thing, something that was able to exploit that would increase in number, and your numbers are going to go down. So the variation would be introduced in that way.
Right.
Just makes you a more robust population.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It just makes you a more successful cell, which then, if you provide variation, you have a more robust population of cells. That would be the result, but it's the cell that is. Selection is just acting not on the population, but on the individual cells. Right? It's not this population that's surviving. You have variation in this, and then that can result in a variable population, which means that can evolve faster.
It's an interest.
That's one of the. How can the problem with sex is a problem because how can a cell all of a sudden give up half of its DNA?
Right.
That's how can you select for that? There's a cost because then you have to fuse with another cell, right?
Right.
And there's a cost in that. So
right.
there must be
Instead of just
huge.
duplicating.
There has to be a huge advantage.
Wow.
There has to be to the DNA that did that.
Okay, so bacteria have DNA, of course, but they don't seem to have introns, and it's not organized into chromosomes.
No, it's not like that.
It's not possible to have meiosis without chromosomes.
Right.
So
Right.
when did chromosomes evolve? What
Well-
came first, the chromosome or the meiosis?
Well, the first eukaryotes that's probably what that was about, was meiosis. Probably
Yeah.
had to do with that. Again, if you could,
Because-
in my life, I'd say I wish I could do 1,000 PhDs. One would be, could I go study in a lab where they're trying to figure this out?
Yeah.
I wouldn't do well at that because I'm not good in the lab. I really am not. I'm not. I don't have the patience to work with pipettes.
I was gonna, yeah.
A lot of
But-
pipetting.
Yeah, that sort of thing. But that's maybe I'll just Google it and see what maybe the origin of meiosis. And Wikipedia will have maybe somebody that's given an updated version. I used to go up, go read journals up at the UW library and
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. But it was fun to try to.
Well, I guess it's an aspect of things that nature did not eliminate DNA that did not have meiosis, right? Mitosis, bacteria, viruses, archaea, they're doing just fine.
Right.
Without meiosis. It's not like nature eliminated
That's
that
right.
in favor of this brand new
That's
thing.
right. That's right. There's still
So
lots of bacteria and
Yeah,
even more viruses.
Yeah. So why, sometimes I think we are inverting the equation because we are meiotic beings and we are multicellular eukaryotes. We say, well, we're the most successful.
Well, I don't say we're the most successful. I just say that we're more complicated and we're more recent than the bacterial cells. And so that what you have to do is understand the chronicle, get the sequence right.
Right.
And to understand the origin of meiosis is very important because that gives you plants, animals, and fungi.
Yeah.
That was a
that's
big
just-
one.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's multicellularity.
And all those protists.
Yeah.
So do all protists, I know protist isn't a
It's a
phylogenetical, but do all, I've never thought of this until this moment, but like, do they all have chromosomes?
Yeah.
Or do any of them have single strand DNA as
Well,
like
there
a
might be
bacteria?
some bizarre ones that are different. There might be. Certainly, there's some bizarre ones originally,
Oh, yeah.
and there may be some are still around. I don't know, but what makes the protists is that they're eukaryotic,
Yeah.
different from the bacteria.
Do
And
all
So
you
does that mean single-celled eukaryotes? Is
Yeah,
that what you
right.
mean when you say
Essentially.
protists?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so they have
Are
a
there things that aren't protists that are single-celled eukaryotes?
Well, there are some that are like colonial, like Volvox, and it's a hodgepodge. There's some slime
Yeah.
molds, which can have cells that adhere to one another,
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
sort of thing. So it's not they're not all single celled. No.
No. So protist is not a phylogenetic thing. It's not like there's a single ancestor and they're all a bunch of protists.
Right.
We just throw everything that's a single-celled eukaryote, and they used to say it's a protist, but then they say,
microzoology,
Yes.
or whatever they used to.
yeah,
something like
exactly.
that. Yeah,
And then
They're completely unrelated from their neighbors.
absolutely unrelated, and they might be far more unrelated to each other than a plant is from you,
Yeah.
than a blade of grass.
Right.
Like, so in the ancient world, when eukaryote means true kernel. They have a nucleus.
Right.
So the question is it the nucleus, is it the chromosome, or is it
Well-
meiosis?
Well, that's a good question.
I don't know.
Well, it's a good question. I imagine there are exceptions. I mean, prokaryotes, the protists, like you say, are a diverse group. But I think what defines them is that they do have a nucleus, and if they have a nucleus, I suspect most of them probably have meiosis.
Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is like if you really zoom out and look at natural selection, the lathe of heaven, you look at the amount of evolution happening on bacteria and viruses and prokaryotic organisms. It's huge. It's this big number. And all eukaryotic life might look like a very small thing relative to the evolution that's happening every second in bacteria, viruses,
Protists.
no, not eukaryotes. The other single-celled
Prokaryotes?
prokaryote, bacteria, archaea. That's
Yeah,
archaea.
archaea.
That's the word. All of multicellular life and protists, everything that's happening inside of a nucleus of a cell and chromosomes might seem like chump change.
Yeah, it might seem like, but
Of course, we're more complex.
these multicellular things, especially once they have hard parts and stuff like that, leave a lot of fossils to be studied. Whereas the bacteria probably don't leave that many fossils from 800 million. Or
Well,
300,
we're sure they
but
don't.
they leave evidence. But I mean,
Right.
so there's something there to study, and
Study for the human mind. I'm talking about look at it from the perspective of natural selection, where it's like, oh yeah, there was this little spin-off. Maybe having a nucleus and chromosomes isn't a success. It's kind of a like, oh shit, we have to invent meiosis in order to simply overcome this shortcoming.
To keep these guys
well,
around. If you're the god of natural selection sitting up on Mount Olympus
Yeah.
looking down.
well, I mean,
Yeah, you
I-
might say,
These
oh, there's this-
bacteria are doing great. These
Yeah.
archaea are pretty cool.
Yeah, this one tiny little city had this little interesting experiment going
sure,
on.
Sure, but still, it led to this bewildering amount of diversity. That's very, very.
What's more
interesting.
diverse, bacteria or eukaryotic
Well, I mean,
life?
that's a good question.
Right.
But I mean, certainly in
I'm
terms
just messing with you.
no, but I mean, in terms of form, if you want to have a form.
Yeah.
Eukaryotes, multicellular eukaryotes have a hell of a lot of different forms which make them interesting, and they
Yes.
can be studied.
Yes.
I mean, and to study the evolution of form in bacteria or even
Difficult.
fungi there you're going to do biochemical evolution. You're going
Yeah.
to look at stuff like that.
You're gonna need to get the pipette out.
I'm going to have to get the pipette
Right.
out.
Where as
Harder
a
to-
19th century
Well, I mean, you're
naturalist,
right. I
I
mean,
can be
even
like,
with-
that's a bear, that's an eagle. I can
Yeah.
tell.
Yeah, yeah.
know,
They're
you-
both tetrapods.
Yeah.
Woohoo.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
you go out into a cathedral, the forest.
Yeah.
Look at these big trees, and you think, "Oh, trees are great." But you have to realize that it's all these fungi down there that are enabling those
Yeah.
trees to grow.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's
And all those big trees have symbiotic fungi. Some of them beneficial, some not. Some of them are sitting there inside of the tree waiting for it to get sick,
and then
hiding in its,
I thought symbiosis implied mutual beneficial.
symbiosis is the big tent.
So it could be
anything
parasitic.
from the worst parasite to
okay.
your most necessary
Gotcha.
partner.
Okay.
and of
Together life.
course,
Yeah.
and the interesting thing is, eukaryotes evolved as a consequence of symbiosis.
Mm-hmm.
Plants from chloroplasts moving in mitochondria.
Yeah.
All these things were
Yeah.
separate
And then-
bacterial things, and so
And they took up residence.
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
A long
And that was a
time ago.
controversial idea when
Right?
it was controversial.
Controversial.
Yeah,
And now it's
Carl Sagan's wife at the time, I think Lynn Margulis was that his wife?
I don't remember.
I think so. It was Carl Sagan's wife that is the one that.
Jeez.
I mean, at
Wow.
the time,
I
I
didn't know that.
think
Yeah.
I could be wrong. I think she was married to Carl
Ar-
Sagan.
Archaea, Carl Woese,
Yeah,
70s,
Yeah.
80s.
yeah. No,
This is like the third branch of life.
well,
Right, and they still weren't teaching it even when I was in elementary school. You
Yeah.
had
No.
your. No one told me about domains. You just started with the kingdoms. There are 5 of them,
Right.
Right?
right?
Right.
And you knew where to
Damn.
put. But you knew about bacteria, and you knew where to put them.
Talk about cognitive bias.
But then my sister was like, "Oh no, there's these things called archaea." Oh,
Yeah.
What? So like, what do you start with?
Yeah.
2,
3.
3.
Eukaryotes, Archaea. Yeah.
bacteria.
Right.
And Archaea have ribosomes that are eukaryotic.
Yeah.
So it's like Archaea are a little bit closer on the circle to us than they are to bacteria.
Yeah.
But the problem with cognitive bias is, of course, we go, well, Archaea are just like special bacteria. No, they're not.
They're separate, major group.
Major group.
Yeah, no, one of the great things that happened, a number of great things happened in my college life on plate tectonics, but also in systematics.
Jesus.
Systematics was cladistics, trying to make your phylogeny honest, rather than saying something. What you do is every time you have a split in the phylogeny, you have 2 equivalent taxa.
Yeah.
And this is what's very important for once getting to the protists and stuff like that, was you have these fundamental splits early on. You can't just put them all in this thing
Yeah.
over here.
Yeah.
You have to be honest and evaluate it. And there was a lot of resistance to
If the-
cladistics because people again had this essentialist thinking of, well,
Yeah.
vertebrates are this and the fish is this, and
Yep.
it was essentialist thinking
Yeah.
rather than and it was also, many people somehow see this direction towards humans, even biologists in evolution somehow there. It's not.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Even when you sort of introduced this earlier, just the. Natural selection hasn't said meiosis is the thing. The stuff preceding it doesn't work. The
No.
stuff preceding it's still around.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, even I still have a hard time keeping that in mind when it comes to the chronicle. I think.
Yeah.
And I think most laymen
They do. They
do have that problem. Like,
Because you do have to learn
we've
the chronicle.
still got wasps.
Yeah.
When did wasps begin?
Yeah.
Right,
We've
right.
still got bacteria.
Right.
Right.
I mean, people
And
would
as many as that, well, I mean, I don't know. Maybe there was some extinction event. Maybe they were more diverse. maybe there was
No.
a time in the
Oh,
world
God.
where they were more diverse. No, probably the most diverse as they've ever been.
Oh.
If you say so.
Think about bacteria. My God.
Yeah.
There's never been a mass extinction that's touched them.
Right. So it's hard just to think about the.
They are the Tao.
Yeah.
Well, I actually had students when I first started teaching. I was teaching a non-majors class, And they say, well, if evolution is true, why are there still fish?
Right.
I mean, they could.
Right, but you were hinting at that same
That's what I was saying,
notion,
yeah.
you know, but it wasn't laughable. You were saying sort of interesting. Evolution invented. Again, those are air quotes.
Right. Yes.
There's no agency.
Yes.
Right?
Small
Nothing
I.
gets designed
Small
or
I.
invented.
Small d. Yeah.
Meiosis is innovated.
Yes. But it might be an
But-
innovation like a survival
But
mechanism.
everything
That's all I'm
else-
saying.
Well, not
Yeah.
everything, but
It might be
everything
something
else-
to overcome a shortcoming because maybe bacteria are still more genetically diverse at the biochemical level than all of.
Oh yeah.
That's all I'm.
They're,
Yeah.
they're certainly not better than in a sense.
Right.
Yes. I mean,
Exactly. Nature doesn't care about that.
No, but they're different then, and they're more complicated in many ways because
Yes.
of that.
Right.
And that does allow for a different form of evolution with recombination. Bacteria do have recombination, but this speeds it up. It really does. That's what meiosis does. It speeds up the origin of variation.
Right, but if what I'm saying is, and I'm not trying to let's overturn biology. We have the term junk DNA.
Right.
Why does it exist? The one place where information lasts is the nucleus of a cell or on a DNA strand.
Yeah.
So how is there junk DNA? Maybe it's a smokescreen to hide DNA from other predatory DNA that might come in.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that meiosis might be something to overcome the limitations that the chromosome and the nucleus puts upon genetic diversity. Because what you'd have to do is compare the clocks of evolutionary ticking of prokaryotes, which they don't even have introns, the exons.
Exons.
They don't even have exons.
Yeah.
And chromosomes do. And there's no junk DNA
Yeah.
in bacteria,
Yeah.
but there is junk DNA in chromosomes. So why is this happening? I think that's all I'm really getting at.
Yeah. Well, I, mean,
I have no idea, and
I
I don't.
think what they're finding is that more and more that what's so-called junk DNA really is not junk.
Right.
Yeah.
How could it be junk?
Yeah.
It's in the nucleus of a cell. It's not
Yeah.
junk.
it's the
If you're actually junk, you're out.
what do
Yes.
they call the Holy of Holies?
Yes, yes, it's the holy of holies.
What?
It's the one place where information lasts in the world.
Yeah. What bacteria have for variation is huge population size and a
Yes.
high mutation rate. I mean, that's
So high.
yeah.
And they cycle between viral and bacterial metabolic populations. Like, don't tell me that you can say bacteria and viruses revolve around each other like yin and yang. Like, you can't tell me that a virus is not. It's the back and front of my hand. They're the same but different.
Yeah.
They can put metabolism on and off like a cloak.
Yeah. And then, and if you know, it was, again, in my professional lifetime, nobody had any idea how dense the bacteria and viruses in the ocean were. And it turns out that's where most of cycling is going on.
Yeah.
Huh.
I mean, that was, of course, this new tools.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we didn't know about viruses. I was in,
There's 10 billion viruses in every liter of seawater.
and then
Every single one.
You mean
For the past billion years.
Individual
Virions.
viruses,
Yeah.
10 billion.
We had no idea.
Every single liter. You'll see a wave crash on
billions
a
and billions.
We don't have a number big enough. It's this infinite standing wave
Yeah.
of natural selection.
Whoa.
It can't be any different.
And it turns, well, even then, it's also, it's prokaryotes that are even more important. I mean, we thought diatoms, dinoflagellates, which are eukaryotes with meiosis and all that.
Yes.
But it turns out really their numbers are relative. Some places are very high, but relative to the prokaryotic blue-green algae and then the viruses and the bacteria, the biomass is. It's just. I mean,
We're the weirdos.
That's what I'm getting at when I say meiosis versus, it's just a question.
Yeah.
I feel like there has to be an answer out there that's not something that makes us feel good about ourselves.
It's funny thinking of like we've flipped our microscope scale so much that like it makes a protist charismatic megafauna compared
does.
to bacteria.
It does.
They
Right?
are.
Right? Like
Yeah.
like a little flatworm or a little water flea or a little tardigrade is now
Oh,
charismatic megafauna
Yes.
compared to the vast majority of life on Earth.
That's right.
you know what I've always? They should make a video game that's just micro world. You don't have to make a single thing up. You know, it's a tardigrade. Oh no, run! It's like Godzilla crashing through the ecosystem. He's gonna.
Tardigrades.
Oh yeah.
They'd be fun to study too.
Oh, they are.
They could survive these extreme environments.
They're all over the place in wastewater treatment.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, you can sit there and watch them chase
Yeah.
things
Oh, you
around
can
on a
see
microscope.
'em?
Oh yeah.
Oh.
Or if you
that's
go pull
fun.
off moss off one of these
Anyway,
trees.
yeah, they're I love them. Yeah.
Well,
Nematodes.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
in this sense, I'll say discovery of this stuff does say something about
Mm.
the human mind.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I wrote a poem one time where they called it smack dab. With science, we are at the center of the universe. I mean, obviously Darwin and Galileo took us out of the center, but with science, everywhere we look, it's everywhere the same, right? I mean, think about it. And everything is changing, and everything has a history. And this, to me, is this to celebrate the human achievement of understanding and figuring out these viruses. I mean, think about that. Wait, I mean, Leo, when was the microscope invented?
It's better-
400 years?
It's better than fiction.
It's much better than fiction. It's much better than fiction. Although there's a lot of good fiction, but it's much better than fiction. Good.